So let's start off with the first question here. Is there any evidence for an infinite God? That's one of the questions I've been asked. How do you know there's a God? Where did God come from? And to answer this question, we're going to start by looking at that molecule of heredity that I'm sure we're all familiar with called DNA. You know, the helical structure of DNA was first discovered by two scientists called Crick and Watson back in 1953. Well, you know what, young people? We know today that scientists have studied a lot more about DNA, and we've found that DNA is not just chemistry. Let me explain that to you. Here is a rope that has beads on it, beads representing dots and dashes. By the way, those dots and dashes actually spell out a word. It's the word help. How do I know that? Well, you only know that if you know the Morse code. If you know the Morse code, if you know the language, then you know that those dots and dashes actually spell out a word. But those dots and dashes don't mean anything to you unless you have the language. DNA has these beads, molecules, lined up in a particular order to write all this information that builds a human, or builds a dog, or builds a cat, or builds an elephant, or whatever. For instance, you're made of trillions of cells, and in nearly every one of your cells, you have all the information that builds you. It's been estimated if you were to type out all the information from one set of your genes, from one of your cells, it would fill, they used to say 1,000 books, 500 pages each, close type written. Now they say it's much more than that. And here's the interesting thing. That information is not in the molecules. The molecules are arranged in a particular order to write the information. Just like when I open up my Bible and I can read it, but the information I'm reading is not in the molecules. The ink has been arranged into letters and into words and into sentences, and because I understand the language it's written in, that's where the information really is. But here's the interesting thing. You've got to have a language to read the information. And DNA itself has the information that makes the language to read the information, that makes the language to read the information, that makes the language to read the information. You get the idea? In other words, you've got to have the information, but you've got to have the language. If you don't have the language, then you can't read the information. It's all got to be there or it won't work. It's all got to be there at the same time. And you know one of the things that we found out? Languages only ever come from an intelligence, and information only ever comes from information. DNA cries out that there's an intelligence behind life. It couldn't have happened by chance random processes. Matter on its own could never produce DNA. But if life evolved, matter had to produce DNA. But that could never happen. For those who believe in evolution, they believe that millions of years ago, somehow life had to arise from matter. As you think about that, it's not just a matter of saying life arose from matter. Life is built on DNA. You've got to have DNA to arise from matter. But not just DNA, you've got to have a language system. Matter produces a language system. Matter has to produce information. People who believe in evolution don't believe in God, and people say matter gave rise to life. You've got to understand, matter had to give rise to zillions and zillions and zillions and zillions of bits of information. And over millions of years, information keeps coming from matter, new information to form all the different kinds of animals and plants, zillions of bits of information. You know what's interesting? We've never seen matter produce one bit of brand new information that never previously existed, not even one bit. An information scientist, Dr. Werner Gitt, wrote a book called In the Beginning Was Information. He's from Germany. And he makes these statements in that book. There is no known natural law through which matter can give rise to information. And he says this, a code system, in other words, a language, is always the result of a mental process. It requires an intelligent origin or inventor. DNA is a language system and an information system. It could not have come about from matter on its own. It's absolutely impossible. And so for evolution in the Darwinian sense, you need to see processes where you see new information being added, zillions of bits of new information added. Actually, what we observe is information being lost or rearranged, not information added. And let me help you understand that. We'll use dogs. We don't know how many dogs God made originally, but let's say there were two dogs, and they got married and had kids, and they got married and had kids, and they got married and had kids, and eventually we end up with lots of dogs. Okay, you know, in genetics, we have a convention where we label genes with capital letters and small letters, big A, big B, little b. So here's a male and female dog, and imagine something like wolves. And you get one set of genes from the male, one from the female. Here we have 2 big A's, 2 big B's, 2 big C's. And here are some different combinations. Now, as you look at that, I want you to notice something. Because these up here are dogs, this is going to be what? A dog. It's going to look a little different to the parent. Why? It doesn't have any new information, but you know what it does have? It's got a different combination of information. You see that? It actually has less information than the parents. You know why it's got less information? It no longer has the little a's or the little b's or the little c's. It's actually got less information. This one here, this to me represents something like a poodle. See, if this represents a poodle, when you breed a poodle with a poodle, what are you going to get? Poodle. Pretty sad, but that's it, right? Could you ever start with poodles on their own and breed back to wolves? And the answer is what? No. But theoretically, could you start with wolves and theoretically, again, get poodles? And the answer would be what? Yes, exactly. Now, understand the account in the Bible concerning Noah's Ark. 2 of every kind was to go on board Noah's Ark. So if dogs are all one family and there are 2 dogs on Noah's Ark, then when they came off the Ark, eventually they produce more dogs and you'd end up with a population of dogs, okay? But they're not going to stay together. What's going to happen is they're going to split up and move to different places on the earth. And as they do, because the incredible amount of variability in the genes, eventually you'll end up with distinct groups, even forming different species. And now you're redistributing the information and you're losing information from certain groups. The opposite of evolution. Who's heard of the term natural selection? Yeah, well, natural selection, we observe natural selection. Darwin was right about natural selection. Who's heard of the term adaptation? Yes, well, adaptation is what's happening here, and speciation, forming different species. See, those terms are used in the secular textbooks to tell students evolution's true. Actually, when you understand natural selection, adaptation, speciation, it's the opposite of Darwinian evolution. It's evidence against evolution, the opposite of what's taught in most of the public school textbooks. Let me help you understand this further. Here are 2 dogs that have an S gene and an L gene. S for short hair, L for long hair. S and L together give a medium hair length dog, okay? So these were the 2 dogs, if you like, on Noah's Ark. So they fall in love and they have offspring. And they have one that inherits an S gene from each of the parents. That one has 2 S genes. It's going to look different to the parents. Does it have different information? Well, it's not new information. It's a new combination of information. But it's going to look a little different because it's got a different combination. And then you might get one that looks like the parents that inherits an S and an L gene. And then there's one other combination. What is that? L and L. Oh, it's got something new. Well, it's got a new combination of information, but the information was already there in the parents. It's just the new combination of information. Now, the dogs move towards a cold climate. Those that have short hair and medium hair get cold, and they die. And now you're only left with dogs that have L genes, who on their own will only ever produce dogs with what? L genes. They could never produce short hair or medium hair again. You form a different species of dog. That's a long-haired dog. You get the idea? If they move towards a hot climate, what's going to happen there? Well, those with long hair and medium hair overheat. They die. And now you're only left with dogs with S genes who on their own will only ever produce dogs with what? S genes. And so over time, through natural selection, adaptation, what happens is you can form all these distinct species of dogs, but they're still 100% dogs, and they came from the original gene pool. Think about this. From a perspective of Darwinian evolution, you supposedly start with matter, no information, and over time, matter has to give rise to zillions of bits of information for all the information to build all the different kinds. So we should see increasing information all the time to build all these different kinds of animals and plants. Actually, what we observe is a loss of information, redistribution of information. It fits exactly with what the Bible would tell us. Actually, when we form different species, they actually have less information overall than the original, which means it's the opposite of evolution. This is evidence against evolution, and yet it's taught as evidence for evolution. And then you start to realize Noah didn't need anywhere near the number of animals on the ark that people think he did. He didn't need all the species of dogs, only 2. He didn't need the African elephants and the Indian elephants and the stegomastodons and the mastodons and the mammoths. He only needed 2 of the elephant kind. And when the elephants came off the ark, again, just like dogs, over time you'll end up with different species forming, but they all come from the original gene pool and the incredible information that God put there in the first place. See how we can have answers? Isn't it easy to understand? Really is. Makes a difference. Helps you understand this. The Bible got it right about biology. Wow.